Are you ready for more on the nervous system? We are on to topic 4, the brain. I'm so excited. And if you have not yet subscribed to my channel, what are you waiting for? Do that now. Okay, so the brain. Oh my gosh, there's so much we could talk about. So I've kind of narrowed it down to some of the basics. But again, this topic I could make 100 videos about and still not cover everything that we know about the brain. So let's get started and see what we're going to focus on in this lesson. So again, the brain, the main organ of the nervous system, and it is protected by many layers. So let's see what we need to talk about. Here we go. So the brain. It weighs about 3 pounds. Not that heavy. There's white matter, and you can see that in the image. That's the inner layer. And it's made of axons, those long connections between neurons that have the myelin around them. Well, most of the neurons have myelin around them, not all do. And then we have gray matter, or the cortex. That's the outer layer. So when you're looking at the brain in this image, you are looking at gray matter. And that has the cell bodies and synapses. So those dendrites and axons, where those connections are, right? So the axon ends at the terminal and it reaches very close, never touches. It's like when your sibling, when you're younger, is like, I'm not touching you, and they're holding their finger ridiculously close and not touching you. That's how neurons are. I'm not touching you, so close. Okay, so the axon ends at the terminal, the dendrites are very close, and neurotransmitters cross that synapse. So the gray matter includes the cell bodies, the big chunk of the neuron where all of the cell parts are, mitochondria, nucleus, all that good stuff, and then also the synapses. So remember, the brain has a lot of protection. So we have skin, obviously, but then we have bone, which has a layer of protection on it called the periosteum. And then we have the dura mater, the arachnoid mater, the pia mater. In between, we have the cerebrospinal fluid, and we have ventricles in our brain that house some sort of pockets of fluid. And then we have the blood-brain barrier as well, which inhibits materials from getting out of blood vessels and into the brain. So let's focus on the brainstem first. So the brainstem sits on top of the spinal cord. It is the most inferior part of the brain, okay? And it includes 3 main parts. So going from superior to inferior. So sitting at the very top of the brainstem is the midbrain. The midbrain is responsible for a lot of our audio and visual processing, so sending signals around to different areas of the brain. The pons, okay, that has sort of the bulge on it. That's how you can tell from a lot of the images. And that has a lot of control over our sleep, our wake, and dreaming, specifically REM dreaming, rapid eye movement. And then the medulla oblongata, literally can't live without this. It is responsible for some of our most basic life functions, like breathing, like your heart rate, like swallowing, like reflexes that aim to save your life, coughing, sneezing, vomiting, okay? And the brainstem sits on top of the spinal cord. So you can see below the medulla oblongata, it would continue as the spinal cord, okay? So that is the brainstem. Okay, and again, medulla oblongata getting damaged does not usually, is not something you can usually survive, okay, because it is responsible for those basic life functions. All right, then the limbic system. I find this so fascinating, okay? We're going to cover 4 main parts of the limbic system. And they're a little tough to differentiate. So I'm not going to ask you to remember them as far as labeling, but you do have to know their functions, okay? And I'm, again, only going to focus on 4, okay? So the hypothalamus, okay? The hypothalamus is responsible for homeostasis. So hypothalamus, homeostasis. It regulates the master gland of the endocrine system, the pituitary gland. So the hypothalamus is responsible for monitoring a whole lot of life functions and then controlling the pituitary, which is then going to control all of the other glands. Okay, so the hypothalamus, extremely important in maintaining our body's homeostasis, blood sugar, body temperature, okay, heart rate, all kinds of hormone levels, Okay, hypothalamus, homeostasis. And then we have the thalamus, okay? And the thalamus is like a sensory relay. So it is going to collect information from different parts and send it around in the brain. So if we go back here for a real quick second, you see the midbrain is responsible for some of that audio and visual processing. So if we go back to the thalamus, you can see its location. It is right next to that midbrain. So makes sense. Okay, so between the midbrain and the thalamus, things get sent where they need to go. Now, the hippocampus. The hippocampus is responsible for long-term memory storage. It's how we remember locations and faces and people. It also makes some connections between emotions and senses as far as our memories go. Okay, now damage to the hippocampus affects our ability to access memories, okay? And then the amygdala. The amygdala is like our most basic emotions. So we respond to and have memory of intense emotions. So like fear, rage, aggression. There can be extreme positive emotions, but this is usually associated with fear, okay? So the hypothalamus, homeostasis. The thalamus is our sensory relay station. The hippocampus is responsible for memory storage and connecting memory to other things like senses and emotions. And then the amygdala is our basic fear response. Okay, does have other emotions tied to it, but again, think of the amygdala as your fear response. So let's talk about a couple things. In movies, there's lots of things portrayed as far as memory goes. So I'm just going to show two movies, 50 First Dates and Memento. Leonard Shelby in Memento, 10 Second Tom, and Lucy Whitmore in 50 First Dates. Okay, they suffer from a condition called anterograde amnesia. So this happens when there's brain damage, and most likely to the hippocampus, that structure we just talked about. And so it results in memory interference. So the brain, this is the thing, the brain still encodes and stores new memories, but the person can't access them. Okay, so it's like you can't make new memories. Your brain is still storing the information, but you're unable to access it. So new things that happen, as far as you know, didn't happen. Okay, so for 10 Second Tom, his window is so short. 10 seconds later, he doesn't remember that it happened. Okay, and this obviously affects everyday life and makes a lot of things difficult. Okay, so people develop strategies, okay, to kind of survive and live their life with this serious condition. So obviously there are gradients in this anterograde amnesia, 10 Second Tom being a most severe case, okay? What about the amygdala damage? Well, there's a woman with no fear who's been studied quite extensively. I think she was born around 1965 in the United States, and they just refer to her by the initials SM. Okay, and she they took her to exotic pet stores. They put her in situations like haunted houses, things where people would experience fear. No fear at all. In fact, she walked from work through kind of like a sketchy part of like a vacant lot, and one time she was attacked. So most people from that situation would develop fear of that location and then avoid that location. She did not do that, continued to take the same path despite having been attacked along that path one day. All right, so cerebellum. The cerebellum is our little brain, okay? It hangs on the back. So the posterior, the most inferior part in the posterior section of our brain, it's responsible for coordination, posture, balance, okay? Things like we can walk, okay? We can do things like swing a bat and make a connection with a ball. All right, and then the cerebrum. Cerebrum is the biggest part of the brain. It is broken up into 2 hemispheres and 4 lobes. And there's the corpus callosum. That is like this thick band that connects the 2 hemispheres. So it's not like the left brain operates solely independently and the right brain operates solely independently. No, there's this corpus callosum, this thick band that connects the 2 halves. So let's talk about the 4 lobes. Okay, so there's the occipital, the temporal, the frontal, and the parietal. And you can see in this picture, you can see the cerebellum and the brainstem. So also crucial to our life functions, but now we're going to look at those lobes individually. Okay, so the temporal lobe right here. I always think about it's close to your ears. Okay, so you see, this one is also kind of weird. Like you can literally lift the flap up and away. It's only kind of connected to the other tissue in the back area. So it's responsible for hearing, so processing auditory stimuli, and it has an area called Wernicke's area, which is responsible for like language comprehension. Okay, so making sense of language. It's also important for memory and information retrieval. So someone with temporal lobe damage might have some trouble retrieving memories. And then we have the occipital lobes. Now remember, right brain, left brain, each has a frontal lobe, a parietal lobe, a temporal lobe, an occipital lobe. So when I say occipital lobes, I mean there's one on the right side and there's one on the left side. So it really is responsible for vision. Okay, so if you ever hit your head in the back part, you might see stars or see a flash of something. That's because literally you stimulated the visual area of your brain. And then we have the parietal lobes, and they kind of sit on the top here. Okay, and the parietal lobes have the area called the somatosensory cortex. And it's responsible for like touch perception, okay, integration of some senses, your body orientation, and processing of our senses. Okay, so knowing the body position and processing all of that sensory information that comes in through whatever stimuli you are encountering. And then the frontal lobe. Okay, so frontal, so here's your frontal area, your frontal bone, and then it's your frontal lobe. Okay, so it has several key areas. The premotor cortex, that's what's responsible for like planning a voluntary movement. So right now I'm thinking about how I'm moving my hand. That's involving the premotor cortex. And then the primary motor cortex is actually making the movement. So the premotor cortex is the plan, and the primary motor cortex is actually making the movement. And then we have the prefrontal cortex, and that's responsible for problem solving. So when you need to have solutions, okay? And then there's Broca's area. So remember Wernicke's area, that's going to be in our temporal lobe, but then we have Broca's area that is responsible for speech. So again, speech involves muscular control. So we need to have control of those muscles in order to speak correctly. And you can see its location to the motor cortex. It is right next to it, so it makes sense. The frontal lobe is also responsible for a whole bunch of other things that really make us us, make us humans, but also the ones that make you you. So it's your working memory. So how can you have the steps in your head? It's our abstract thinking. It's our personality. It's our social behavior. It's our judgment. Okay, a whole lot of things are happening in that frontal lobe. All right, so now let's talk about the hemispheres. So lateralization has to do with your motor control. So the right hemisphere of your brain controls the left side of your body. And the left hemisphere of your brain controls the right side of your body. Okay, that's lateralization. Now, the right hemisphere is responsible for creativity, your spatial ability, imagination, arts, music, color, recognizing people and faces. It's kind of like whole picture, okay? It's a holistic view, seeing the whole picture. The left hemisphere, on the other hand, is speech and language and logic. It's reading, it's writing, it's sequencing, it's science, it's math. Now, in reality, those things are not 100% housed, left brain or right brain, okay? But maybe focused there, okay? But it's not 100%, okay? So it's not like you find out, oh my goodness, I'm good at all these left brain things, I'm good at nothing on the right brain. That's not true. Also, it's not that the left brain never does those things either, okay? It's just a general trend, but again, it's not a 100% rule. All right, so first of all, I love this image that I found. So look at this, all of the words kind of going around, plus the images explaining kind of the difference between right and left hemisphere. So if you want to pause this and look at it, I think this is an outstanding visual for left brain versus right brain. Okay, so left brain, great at things like word puzzles. Okay, so good at crosswords, good at, like you get a word like, here's the word superpower, and how many words can you make from that word? Okay, those kind of things. It's logic, it's problem solving. That tends to be a left brain kind of thing. So now sometimes our left and our right are in conflict. So things that are normally housed in the left brain and things that are normally housed in the right brain, and they come together in sort of this clash, and it creates some mistakes when we're trying to make sense of it. So an example is when you're trying to solve Mad Gab. So your left brain is going to read this: hopper, tune, hit, teen, ox. And you're going to say, that makes no sense. Okay, but we need our right brain to process that whole picture in order to understand what it is. So hopper, tune, hit, teen, ox. And you keep saying it faster and faster. Hopper, tune, hit, teen, ox. Did you hear it? I just heard it. Hopper, tune, hit, teen, knocks. Opportunity knocks. Okay. Also happens with all kinds of puzzles like this, where you have a list of words, but they're in a different color. So you have to read through them. So you can recognize the color, but you can also see the word. So these things are like, and it's hard for your brain. So reading, and I want to say the word, I don't want to say the color. So you can say blue, green, yellow. But now I want to say the color: red, yellow, green, blue, black. Okay, you want to say the word, okay, but you're not supposed to say the word. You're supposed to say the color. Now, who would be better at this? Somebody who can't read, who just can recognize colors, right? And their brain wouldn't have that conflict. Here's another example. Clearly, the pictures do not match the word. So the idea is you're going to say what the picture is, not the word. So the first one: window, chair, book, couch, hanger. Okay, you don't want to read the word. Okay, you want to just identify the picture. But a lot of people make mistakes because, again, there's this clash between the left brain and the right brain, and you try to make sense of it. And for some people, it's really difficult. So you could pause it here and try these and see how good you are at them. And there you have it. That's the nervous system, all about the brain. Again, if you haven't subscribed, take a minute and do that. I'd love to have you learn some more. We'll be back for more anatomy content and other things as well. So hope you learned something about the brain. I find it fascinating.